Tie, by the way.
Good evening, everybody who's out there. For the first one for me for over a month, welcome back to my channel for a live stream with 3 China experts. But we're going to be talking about what happened today. And I see Einer's got his black tie on to mourn the death of democracy. So let's get straight into it. Welcome, everybody. And Warwick, Einer, and Dr. John, thank you very much for joining me. Straight into it, because I know, Einer, you have to go for a few minutes quite soon. Let me hit you with the first question, and I'll ask the other guys for their opinions. So before you go, I'd like your opinion on the trade war. Remembering that it was Trump who started this. I mean, I know he didn't start it all, but he really started the tariffs and the trade war that we are now in, and Biden doubled down. Do you think there will be further escalations? Was his political talk all rhetoric? Or what direction do we think it will go for China?
Well, Trump has a history of pushing out threats and things like this, and it's part of his negotiating, modus operandi, let's say. So he'll come on very, very strong and just see if you budge, and then try to get as much as he can. The difficulty here is it isn't 4 years ago. And I mean, 8 years ago I should say 6 years ago when he really started in earnest, things have changed. China has really leapt ahead in so many different areas. And it's exposed the fact that the United States has both logistical and trade issues. They have a very hard time replacing all those special materials that rare earths that they use in semiconductors and things like this. China has made leaps and bounds in terms of making chips and things like this. So it's going to be very, very difficult. If he does go ahead and do it, though, keep this in mind. Those tariffs aren't going to hurt China. They're going to hurt everybody in the world. Why? Because it's going to increase the prices of an already, at its limit, American economy. That's why he got in. He was able to push this idea that he could solve the economy, and people believed him. But even Musk beforehand said, well, it's going to be really rocky to begin with. Well, what does that mean? When those tariffs hit, prices go up. People who aren't making it now are certainly not going to make it then. There's going to be a lot of complaining. Trump thinks that this is going to bring jobs back to the United States. It's this America First policy. Actually, it's just going to raise costs. The U.S. cannot possibly produce everything that is necessary for them. I mean, to give you an example, the trade deficit for the first 3 quarters of this year went up 12%. That's not the good direction. And adding more to the already overburdened lower and middle classes is not going to be very helpful. But when they do that, it reduces demand, and that reduced demand will have a knock-on effect throughout the world. I estimate that it'll definitely push things into a further recession, as well as perhaps a depression.
Yeah. Dr. John, what do you think? Is Trump likely, is it just rhetoric, or is he likely to batten down the hatches and protect American interests?
I don't think it's just rhetoric. I mean, he's been saying that promise made, promise kept. And I think probably more importantly, it is all because of Robert Lighthizer. I think, and if you look at his speeches, his interviews, his book, it's very clear that Robert Lighthizer, who is most likely to hold a very high, cabinet position, probably people talking about Secretary of Commerce. His view is that tariff is not the end; it's a means to an end. His purpose is just decoupling. It's stated very clearly. I don't think he's going to shy about mentioning that word even. To the extent possible, he wants the United States to be decoupled from China in every possible way. I think it's not just rhetoric. It's something that they are going to seriously do it. Now, when it comes to this trade relationship, I think it's more than just raising prices. The tariffs will be just passed on as part of prices to consumers. Maybe initially it's going to be that, but eventually this trade is going to disappear. Definitely it's going to hurt China. I know I disagree with you on that. Definitely it's going to disagree. I think we're talking about an export amount of over $400 billion. I mean, it's a huge pot of money here we're talking about. Um, you know, Millions of jobs behind it. And it represents, just based on a very rough calculation, somewhere around 1.5% of China's GDP. And so this is a serious challenge in my view. Probably we're not going to talk about 60% tariff tomorrow or within a week, but I think definitely it's going to be introduced in phases over this administration of 4 years. My prediction is that by the end of the 4 year his administration time, China-U.S. trade might be just 1/3 of it, of what we are having right now. It's a serious matter. It is a big challenge. I'm not even sure there will be an opportunity for a bilateral negotiation. I mean, remember last time during his previous administration, there was a period of time that actually both sides negotiated. They go back and forth, and try to strike a deal. Eventually, they did strike a deal, which Trump was very angry about in hindsight. He didn't think that this deal was not even closely implemented according to his view. So I think he probably don't even believe in negotiation. He probably don't even believe in reaching a deal. I'm actually quite pessimistic, as you can obviously tell, that this is going to be a huge challenge.
Yeah, Warwick, what do you think? I read somewhere recently that it's possible to decouple from China, but it's almost impossible to decouple from this supply chain that China is the foundation of, or the source of. Almost everywhere that they would want to buy something from, or everywhere they want to buy from, is already made in China and then sold to, say, Mexico or Thailand or wherever else. Do you think that's going to be the case in the future?
I'm neither pessimistic nor optimistic, in the sense that I think the United States is likely to continue on a policy trajectory that is largely self-harming. Yes, it will have some fallout effects on others in the short term as they need to adjust and create and find new markets elsewhere. But the fact is that, yeah, as John says, it's a market of substantial size, but it's not going to disappear in one instant, which means that enterprises that are in the business of exporting, where some of their capacity is dependent upon export markets, will need to find new markets. The growth markets are in Southeast Asia and Africa and West Asia. And those markets will need to grow substantially, of course, to compensate for the United States market, should that shrink in absolute terms over time. But look at it from the United States point of view, as opposed to the question of exporters who will find new markets. The United States point of view is a desire to decouple, as John said. And what happens in the process? Well, in the process of doing that, it will either need to buy things that it doesn't produce from other places. And of course, it can do that from Vietnam, Malaysia, Mexico, wherever. And they are largely from Chinese firms. So that's the first thing it could do. The second thing, of course, it starts to want to do is develop its own capabilities. The challenge it has in the short term to do that is that it doesn't have sufficient intermediate goods or capital goods of its own to be able to do that, and it's going to have to import them. So that's the second challenge that it's going to face. And the third challenge that it's going to face is that there are parts of the supply chain that by all means decouple all you want, but you won't actually have an alternative. And if you don't have an alternative for some of the critical intermediate goods, then you're not going to have certain industries. And one of the interesting ones, and one of the most interesting ones, is actually in the American military-industrial complex, which, according to their own consultants' estimates, is dependent on over 10,000 Chinese firms for intermediate goods. So I look, America will do what America will do. And so far, over the course of the last 6 or 7 years, has pursued policies that, of course, has impacts on others, but its principal impacts have been on themselves. The evidence shows that the Trump tariffs first time round did not bring the jobs back. Increased costs for enterprises and households, and actually led to worse outcomes in many of these places. The fact that Biden continued those actually impoverished many of these communities that they both claim to, want to represent. And unsurprisingly, as we saw in the election in the last, 24 hours, the old Rust Belt states, have voted very clearly.
The economy is a big factor.
They've been done over for years. The promises that have been made to them about the jobs coming back have been made for years, and it just hasn't happened. So, hey, if doubling down on failed policies makes you feel better, then go for your life. Go for your life.
So, John, do you think there's a time, or there will come a time in the next 12 to 18 months where your pessimism comes to the fore and they say, oh dear, this hasn't worked, let's walk back some of these sanctions? Is that possible during the next administration?
When is the last time that Donald Trump negates his own policy? He is famous for doubling down. He never admits any mistakes. It's all somebody else's fault. He's not going to walk back. This is part of his legacy. He doesn't have a second term to contemplate anymore. He will just do whatever he wants. I just don't think there's zero probability that he would try this and say, okay, this doesn't work, let's change course. Now that's just not Trump's style.
So we have 4 more years of trade war, doubling down, increased sanctions, and of course they'll encourage the European Union to do the same thing. I'll just put this comment up. I'll bring some comments up as they come in. The EU is now ready to do more trade with China. Trump doesn't like the EU either. Warwick, what do you think?
Look, a lot gets made about trade. The first thing I'll say is that this hullabaloo about trade policy is a failure of actual industrial development. You can't trade what you don't make. And to think that your problem is actually trade policy as opposed to industrial development, the role of finance in the hollowing out of your own industries, really fails to diagnose the cause of the problem in the first place. So that's the first point that I'll make. The second point, I guess, is that, again, when it comes to the Europeans are in a pickle. They are in a position where the absolute bedrock basis of economic systems, energy, has gotten to a point where they are paying 400% more than their counterparts in Asia or in North America. And that was a finding in the Draghi review that was done for the European Commission on European competitiveness. And they don't know what to do about it, because the only thing that they can do about it in the short term is to find a way to repair their relationship with Russia and, again, access Russian oil and gas without going through intermediaries who are adding in a substantial intermediary margin. Now, the Europeans aren't going to be doing that, and certainly not in the short term. There's too much at stake politically for the elite in Brussels to walk back on that. Whether that happens over the next 3 to 4 years is a different case altogether, however, as the fractures within the European body politic, both at an individual national level and as discontent continues to grow about economic funk, swamping the economic systems across Europe, well, maybe voters will at some point progressively turf out the neocon and neoliberal elite who've led them down this particular pathway. And if that happens, then Europe will have an opportunity to rethink what Europe is all about. But at the moment, it's in a mess.
Well, since we're talking about Europe, I'm going to skip. I've got a list of questions here, but I'm going to skip a couple down and go to this point that Trump made a few weeks ago, where he said, if I'm elected, I'm not going to wait till the inauguration. I'm going to stop the Ukraine war. John, do you think he can do that?
Absolutely. I think the person who is most worried about this Trump win on earth is going to be Mr. Zelensky. I think he's probably very scared right now. Look, this war just cannot go on, in my view, for a week if there's no support from America. I'm not just talking about the money, and the appropriation from the Congress of funds. It's more than that. I mean, look at the weapons, the arms; they're all coming from the U.S. Even if they have money to buy all these things, they're not going to come. So I think when Trump gives Mr. Zelensky a call, say, look, you need to start to talk, you need to negotiate. I don't think Zelensky is going to push back. Maybe if he can, he's going to push back no matter what, without even thinking about himself, his future, right? But most likely, the Ukrainian side is going to succumb to the pressure from Washington. It's actually a good thing if they start talking, but my concern is that the Russians don't want to talk right now. As a matter of fact, I'm actually in Sochi right now attending a conference here, and you can understand the jubilant feeling here in this country on the news that Trump is going to go into the White House. But my understanding from talking to a lot of people here is that right now it's not the time to talk. The Russian army is to keep marching. They feel like they can get what they can't get on a negotiating table from the battleground. I think President Putin stated very clearly, these 4 oblasts that have been already annexed into Russian based on the new constitution, they got to be under the control of the Russians. Yep. So no matter what's going to happen, they're going to take full control of these 4 oblasts. Other than maybe the northern part of Kherson, northern part of the Kherson, north of the Dnieper River. Probably that's a long stretch to try to get that. But other than that, my conjecture is that the Russian army is not going to stop until they take full control of every oblast in East Ukraine.
Well, that may be a very good thing, a negotiating tool for them. Maybe they'll just say, "Yeah, we'll stop the war as soon as we have these 4. So you've got to concede them," and that could be the end of the war tomorrow if we believe what Trump said. What do you think, Warwick? The other thing I'm worried about? And I'll get your opinion on Ukraine, but I'm a little worried that he wants Ukraine finished so that he can focus on Iran.
Let's wind the clock back a little bit.
Sure.
In late 2021, the Russians put on the table a proposed security treaty arrangement for Europe as a basis of negotiating a settlement with Western Europe and the United States. That was, of course, prior to the invasion in February 2022. Mm-hmm. When the Russians put that forward in late 2021, it was just dismissed out of hand by the Americans and, of course, by the remainder of the Europeans. So I think that there's actually more at stake than the 4 oblasts. What's at stake, and the Russians, I think, are in a position now to take this matter forward, should they wish to, is this question of a European security architecture that takes this question of Ukraine as an important part, but ultimately has a hell of a lot more to it than just a little bit of territory. And we need to actually start to get our heads around the proposals that were canvassed in 2021 and what those implications are as far as the extent to which the Americans and NATO and the Europeans are able to arrive at a new settlement. The collective Western forces have been demonstrably and comprehensively defeated in the battlefields of Ukraine. They spent 8 years building up Europe's largest land army, the Ukrainian army, to NATO standards with an increasing amount of NATO armaments. That army was destroyed during the course of the first half of the current Ukrainian war, and they've had to reconstitute their army arguably 2 times over ever since, to a point where they are recruiting old men, people of my age and older, to plug gaps, providing them with negligible training, and of course, as John intimated, providing them with negligible equipment and materiel that would enable them to actually sustain combat on the front lines. So the battle has shown that the collective West is in no position to sustain a conventional war with Russia. Russia knows this. Russia, of course, is also keen for a settlement of sorts. Nobody wants to fight forever wars. But this is a window of opportunity of a generation to force a serious, meaningful engagement around security architecture that Russia was not in a position to do in the previous 20 years. So that it won't just be a case of sorting out a little bit of land concession, in my view.
Okay. I'm just answering a question here because somebody asked me about Taiwan. I said, we'll come to Taiwan in a moment. And someone said, oh, you mean they're going to come to Taiwan soon? Take it over? We are going to come to Taiwan, but later. Let's move on to what I had next. The next G20 meeting. Now, I'm going to ask you for a little speculation here rather than your experience. The next G20 meeting is in Brazil in a couple of weeks' time. Who's going to represent the United States at that meeting? Will it be Biden? Will it be Harris? Or will it be Trump? Or will it be somebody else from the administration? John, what do you think?
Well, first of all, we have to rule out Mr. Trump. He's not being inaugurated yet.
No, he may invite himself. This is the view that I have.
No, the Biden administration won't let him go. I'm pretty sure of that.
They can't stop him traveling to Brazil.
I can surmise that Harris doesn't want to go. I mean, she wants to lick her wounds and have some healing time, right? So it's going to be very, very difficult for her. Whether Mr. Biden is going to go, I'm not sure either, actually. So it's not meaning. I mean, this summit is not going to be of too much meaningfulness to the Americans anyway. This is a lame duck president, and in a way, I think this vote against Kamala Harris essentially is a vote against Biden administration. I think to some extent the Harris campaign is indeed the collateral damage of the more or less 4-year failed administration under the Biden presidency. He doesn't probably want to go as well. I mean, it's pretty humiliated in my view. So my guess is probably going to send Anthony Blinken over there. Right. I mean, the Americans are going to go there and make a speech and whine a little bit, but I think it's irrelevant anyway. They're going away. They're fading away in history.
This is what I was thinking. Warwick, do you think we're talking about the G20 here, and the United States leads the G20, but to have them as an irrelevance at the G20 summit, what do you think? Who will go?
Well, firstly, I think John's dissection of the emotional state of the key players is spot on. There will be very little appetite to turn up to it. But I guess that there's a broader question here, and that is whether or not the G20 actually has any sway or any heft anymore. And this question came up last year when the G20 convened in India. And I guess the question is going to arise again as to whether, in fact, the G20 is able to arrive at meaningful, actionable consensus amongst the G20 on issues of global significance that require coordinated effort, whether it's in the areas of energy transition or dealing with global hunger or financial institutions reform to become more inclusive, which incidentally are 3 signature issues that Brazilian President Lula has put on the table. Whether or not the G20 actually has the wherewithal to do anything meaningful about these 3 topics, I think is open to serious doubt today. And in part, it's because the Americans have lost their ability to carry the world, for what that's worth. And the premier institution where the United States would carry the day has been hollowed out in part because the Americans tried to turn the G20 into a platform to proselytize, some campaign that they had on one thing or another, as opposed to using it as a platform to address economic coordination, consensus building. And they're going to meet in a couple of weeks' time. It's hard to see whether or not it's going to achieve any real traction. And in a sense, so the caravan will roll on. So the caravan rolls on.
So we're just talking about the G20 and who will represent the United States there, because Kamala will be busy licking her wounds, as John says. Biden has got no appetite for it whatsoever, and maybe not even enough cognitive functions to attend. And they probably will send Blinken. But what do you think? Einan, welcome back. Do you think that this is an opportunity for China at the G20?
Well, it is in a sense that this is kind of self-mutilation. Most of all the countries except the U.S. Are be very uneasy about a Trump presidency and what he said. I mean, 100 or 200% tariffs on European vehicles. 100% on anybody who uses anything other than the dollar for their trade. There are a lot of threats there. No one knows exactly what he's going to put up there. I think Gina Raimondo will probably go. I don't think even Blinken has the stomach to go there. And if that's the case, I mean, the U.S. will basically be absent. They will not be in a leadership position. People will look to somebody else in the room who has a much steadier economic plan, a real plan that stretches out for more than the next 10 minutes. That has been looked at by economists who know what they're doing. Obviously, Xi Jinping is the representative there who's going to be getting the most attention simply because of the American default. In terms of G20, it's I don't know. I mean, it's really right now in competition with BRICS in different ways, but it's not been able to solve anything because you haven't had the resolve or leadership that the U.S. has to put in there in order for it to work. And since the U.S. doesn't want to cooperate with China, it's been ambivalent about Europe, and the rest of the world is kind of like, you should do what I say as opposed to what I do. It just hasn't been impressive. And under Donald Trump, it will basically become useless because as I said, without the U.S. actively participating and saying, I'll put something into the pot and let's make a solution, it's not going to work. Trump is going to be the anti-G20. It'll be the G1, make America great again, and only America. So I agree. I have a lot of ambivalence about what can be accomplished there. But if they kick the U.S. out, maybe many things are possible. I don't think that's going to happen.
It's going to be a two-way street. I mean, U.S. is relevant to G20, and G20 is going to be relevant to the United States. I mean, every single conference item that Warwick mentions is totally at odds with America first. Look at the climate change. He calls it a hoax, right? Electric car, that's a lunacy. You can go on and on and on. I mean, every item that Warwick mentions, I think is at odds with what Trump is all about. I don't think he's going to, he would rather this thing go away.
I can kind of see Trump inviting himself to the G20 and then trying to hold meetings with other leaders while he's there. That's and if he doesn't, then he's really in a difficult position, because what you said there, Einar, is really good. The G1 versus the G19, and that's how it's going to be if nobody is there from the future administration. So I think he'll have to have somebody there if he's not there himself.
Well, Jerry, he has people he can send,
Yeah.
Lighthizer, but I mean, he's not going to get very much of a welcome. They'll say, well, I have to deal with you to somewhat, but I think you're crazy.
Yeah.
I think a lot of countries will be waiting to see exactly how far Trump goes when he's actually in power, whether these are, partial threats, whether, he's, as John was saying earlier, whether he stages the increases, 10% this year, 10% every year that's there, or 15% every year. That's the kind of stuff he'll have to end up doing, because it would be too short and sharp a shock to the American economy otherwise.
Well, let's move on from the trade situation. I've got another question here, which I'm going to leave the issues with Hong Kong, Tibet, and Xinjiang out, because they are all now pretty much lame ducks. I think everyone in the world, other than the diehards, really knows that those things are just CIA narratives and not real things. But Taiwan is a real thing. And I'm wondering what's going to happen. Do you think that the one China policy will be affected by what's happened today with this election? And will America finally move away from ambiguity and into some kind of proper status? So, Warwick, first of all, what do you think?
I think the United States' general approach on the question of Taiwan is to ensure that instability persists as long as possible. And it has zero interest in enabling reunification, certainly not peacefully and smoothly. That would run against everything that the United States has stood for in relation to the island going back 80 years. And at the same time, it will necessarily lead the separatists astray, to the extent that they need the separatists to remain agitated and active. And but they'll never want the separatists to actually get too far along that path, because the risk that they run, meaning the United States, is that might actually provoke some resolution of the unresolved civil war. And there is a very high probability, should the civil war be resolved in the next 20 years, that it will be resolved in a way that won't satisfy America's interests. So the United States is keen for there to be persistent instability. They will fuel that to the extent that they need. They will make promises. They will provide armaments, even if they're ratty and rusty. And they will give emotional succor to the separatists, whilst at the same time ensuring that they don't actually have the wherewithal to do anything meaningful at all. And that's where the United States, I think, is going to try to land their policy balancing act.
Interesting, John. What do you think? What's the future of the short-term future with Taiwan looking like?
Well, I think the Trump administration is going to enhance the risk of the Taiwan issue from China's perspective, from mainland's perspective. His overall attitude towards Taiwan is that, first of all, he would like to sell a lot of arms to Taiwan at exorbitant prices. Wait, prepare for that. I mean, he's going to put a price tag on the table, and there's no room for the Taiwanese to even negotiate about that. You get it. You pay it for it. So he's going to sell these arms. The second thing I would say is that he is happy to see, these what I call independent venturism, getting more enhanced in Taiwan. He would like to see a little bit of more trouble on this island for China's, to make things more difficult for China. But right. Third thing is that when it comes, I mean, when the Taiwanese separatists do something like this, I think that the mainland side will have to respond. And it has to respond. The only way, in my view, to respond is to increase military pressure. That doesn't mean that war is going to break out, but it's going to increase the military pressure. And the American side and the Trump administration is not going to come to the Taiwanese help. I mean, they're not going to come to aid them, and that's pretty sure. He's already saying this. Okay, so if this analysis is true, it actually doesn't bode well for Taiwan. Doesn't bode well for the mainland side. It's a trap that waits for the two sides of the Taiwan Strait to get deeper and deeper into. And I hope people on both sides, both on the Taiwan Island as well as on mainland, will have the wisdom to see through this trap, to see through what the Trump administration is thinking about, and don't get into this trap. That's my warning.
Yeah. I'm of the same opinion, but I think that I have more confidence in this side. I'm in the mainland, so I'm fairly confident that they'll be fairly stable. What do you think? I know it'll be unusual if all four of us agree.
Well, I don't. Not to be contrarian, but no, I agree with most of what's said. I mean, Trump is first off going to say, look, the price for giving you protection, it's kind of like the mafia guy on the corner comes to your little place and says, hey, you've got to pay me if you want protection. And the number is going to be high. And as John said, they won't be able to negotiate. But the other thing that Trump has been leading up to is that he wants the Taiwanese, as part of any deal, to move a good percentage of their chip making business to the United States. And he's going to demand that. That's his America First things. He already laying the groundwork, because he said Taiwan stole the chip making business from the United States. Clearly doesn't understand what he's talking about, but I mean, emotionally, that's where he's setting it up, that they took stuff from us. America, poor little victim, richest, most powerful country in the world, but we've been constantly taken advantage of by other nations, and that's his shtick. I mean, this is what he always leads with, that he's going to protect the U.S. from being victimized, and Taiwan, if he's able to extract the chip making business, then Taiwan is irrelevant. He could care less, and that, I think, I agree with John. I think the Taiwanese will see through that. They understand that there are interests that want to hollow out their economy. But once that happens, they have no use whatsoever. It's a faraway island that most Americans couldn't even pinpoint on a map.
Neither could Australians either. I keep hearing from people I know in Australia that as soon as China's finished invading Taiwan, they're going to roll over and invade Australia.
Well, it's a short hop,
It's a short hop.
You can practically see it, right?
Only 10,000 kilometers away. The comment came in: will TSMC ever finish building plants in the United States?
They have one that has phase one is due to come online. They have a chip design. It's apparently going to work at some level, but they've been very coy about when the other segments of this project come online. And the difficulty is timing. The plants that were started in Taiwan are already producing, and you only make money at the big money at the front end. As soon as it becomes commodity, it's meaningless. So why do you want to create a chip factory in the U.S. that's coming late to the game, is therefore almost a commodity at that time, unless they can extract some agreement that the federal government is going to buy up all the chips that they make.
Right. Yeah. Warwick, what do you think? Will TSMC ever be operating fully in the United States under Donald Trump?
Well, I think one of the critical problems that they've got is access to the right skilled labor in sufficient quantity, and that's not going to change particularly quickly. So even on face value, if you read the reports as to what has been holding up these plants, it's access to skilled labor of sufficient quantity and of a cultural fit that would be able to work within a TSMC production environment that you need to achieve the kinds of efficiencies for these plants to be meaningful. Look, a lot of the policies that have been pursued have been largely affective. They've been designed to, in large part, deal with the emotional wounds of 40 years of hollowing out. And the hope, of course, is that you throw enough money at something, and to some extent there's some truth in this. You'll get a shed, and you'll get fancy equipment in it, and you'll run power to it, and you'll have enough workers to do something, and you can tick that as a we've brought some jobs back to America thing.
Right. John, what do you think? If TSMC ever is operating in the United States, will they have a market for their chips, or will China need to buy them?
Well, I mean, the issues about cost, about efficiency, about labor supply. Do you really think that Trump would be worrying about these things? I mean, he doesn't even care. He just wants some jobs to be created in Arizona. So the way he talks to TSMC, just like what Anna has been describing, it's like a mafia boss said, "Hey, listen, you got to do something here. We need jobs in Arizona. Move it over. Don't talk to me about this cost stuff. Just do it." That's what I think. The way you talk about it.
John, if you're the company, you might wonder, who am I going to sell these overpriced chips to?
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
That's no problem.
We'll just build. I mean, the government may say build it, and they will come. But who's going to come? Who's buying these chips?
I firmly believe that the way he described this thing, he's talking about TSMC stealing American jobs, right? So he likes to use the word steal. He talks about the trade surpluses by China with the United States trade is stealing money from US. So his jobs are stolen.
John, a thief will always accuse everyone else of stealing.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. Let me ask a question about the Democratic Party. I know this happened when Hillary lost a few years ago, but Kamala's gone home. It's evening now, quite very late in the evening now in the United States. Kamala went home, and there was no speech. There was no thank you. There was no, she's got thousands of volunteers. She's got hundreds of employees. She's got millions of people who voted for her, and she's just gone home and ignored them all. In my opinion, that's the end of her career. If she did that to me, and I'd spent several weeks or even months working my guts out as a volunteer to help her get elected, and she didn't even have the courtesy to say, thank you, and I'm sorry I let you down, or whatever her reason, or I'm sorry they stole it from me, whatever reasons they have. But she didn't. That's the end for Kamala, in my opinion. Where do the Democrats go next? Ina, you're kind of the go-to guy on American politics. Well, they've got 4 years to decide, but who comes next?
Well, I quite frankly, she was the wrong candidate. We had a number of discussions, Warwick, John. The fact that is, she wasn't the one. You needed somebody who could run from outside the administration, because the problem was the economic policies. Biden had convinced himself he was doing a great job. He was living in some sort of insane little bubble of his own making. But over 70% of Americans felt that they were living paycheck to paycheck.
Yep.
If they were going to win, they needed somebody outside the administration who could actually run against some of Biden's policies, a governor who had been successful in, managing relations between a red state legislature and a blue governor. Those are the kind of people that are useful. Waltz. He's an all shucks kind of guy, but he's actually run a government and then successfully in terms of his being a governor. Those are the kind of people you want. You need somebody who can pull things back together. I forecast that there will be a massive reaction, pendulum swing against Trump in 4 years from now, because things will be in really, really bad shape. And when that happens, you're going to see people kind of coming up, looking for the opportunity. But defaulting to her was the wrong situation. She's obviously devastated. I feel for her on a personal level, but she ran a lousy campaign in the sense that she didn't define herself. She decided she wanted to make points at the only debate she was assured of having, try to make Trump look bad, make Trump the issue. But in most people's minds, the issue was the economy, and she just didn't see it. And that is her problem. Famously, she was on a CNBC talk show, which is a softball organization for Democrats. And they, looked into her eyes and said, "What's your vision for America?" And she looked back and said, "Could you be more specific?" So it was an enormous fail in her ability to see things for where they are. She's very good in the moment. She's talking to somebody and, making a little plan, and I'll connect to this person and that thing. But just the overall vision was lacking.
Warwick, what do you think? Who's next or what's next for the Democrats? What happens tomorrow morning when they come to work?
Well, there'll be a little bit of finger pointing.
A little bit.
That the first thing that will happen will be a process of bloodletting, and a bunch of folk will be diving for cover, hoping to not get blamed. That'll be the first thing. Whether they're pollsters, whether they're operatives, whether they're part of the party elite establishment, but this has been a debacle. They've lost the House, they've lost the Senate presidency, and they lost the overall vote. This has been a total debacle for the Democratic Party. And what it also shows is a party that not only was caught up in its own hubris and nonsensical beliefs that it was doing an amazing job, probably because it listened to the echo chamber of the Paul Krugmans of the world, who kept blathering on about how well the American economy was going, when in fact you could read on any mainstream media story after story about credit card delinquencies growing, the cost of housing in swing states growing at a faster rate than the rest of the country, people living from paycheck to paycheck, people going without meals to be able to afford rent or afford their mortgage. The blowout in the credit card situation was getting worse and worse as interest rates went up. It meant that people couldn't even eat away at the principal that they owed on their credit card, let alone get on top of the 20+% interest rates that were being charged. So you've got a party that has basically lost touch with mainstream America. And when you look at where the votes were, it seems to me, not having done a detailed spatial or demographic analysis, but skimming across the exit polls and the various commentators talking about this, it seems that the Hispanic working classes, the Black working classes, the Asians, and the white working classes basically all fell behind Trump and abandoned the Democrats once and for all. They'd already begun to walk away from them in the 2016 election. And the great flip, the great transition, the demographic transition, looks like it's complete. And, and the evidence of that is not only the spatial distribution of the vote, but the fact that the Republicans have won the majority across the country for the first time in 5 elections? 5 elections? I mean, the system was so gerrymandered that the Republicans could win the presidency without the majority of the popular vote. But this election, they romped it in. Absolutely romped it in.
John, what do you think about that? You're just about to add something important here.
Yeah, I have to admit, I totally misread this election. There's something more fundamental going on in my view. It's not just a matter of choosing the wrong person to run. It's not just a matter of not enough time to run. It's not just a matter of the campaign strategy is not right. I think this conservative movement is coming very strong. I think there's a fundamental shift in American society. I think it's economic issues are definitely very important. This is one of the the cards that Trump played. But I think on several social issues, the majority of Americans actually going against the Democrats. The border issue, the immigration. I think a lot of people actually agree with Donald Trump, and also about pro-business, about economic policies, and all of these things. I think especially as Ward was talking about, it's so shocking to see that the percentage of blacks, percentage of Latinos behind Trump is just staggering to me. I mean, this is against the backdrop of a comedian, 2 weeks before the election, openly make a mockery of the half percentage, half of the Latino population who are Puerto Ricos in the United States, make fun of the blacks, make fun of the Latinos, and these jokes just fly in their face. But nevertheless, so many people are still voting for Donald Trump. So I think there's a really a fundamental shift here. And I have thought about the prospect of Trump winning this election, but I didn't even remotely thought about that he can win this election with such a big margin. He's winning Michigan, winning Pennsylvania by 200,000 votes, right? Yeah. In Wisconsin, I think how many? I think about 100,000 votes in Wisconsin. This is just alarming and just shocking to me. And I have to admit that there's a fundamental change going on in American society right now. It's shifting to the right. I think the Democrats and the progressive wing, the left wing of the Democratic Party is going too far. They're antagonizing a lot of people in society, and I think there's got to be some reckoning and some soul searching on the part of Democrats.
Well, very interesting. One of the few people that I saw on all of the groups that I'm in who kept saying, "I think Trump will win," was you, Ina. You got it right. You read it. What did you see that nobody else, or not many? I actually felt like he would win the popular vote. I didn't think, as John just said, it would be like this red wave sweeping over America. But you must have seen something that the rest of us missed.
Well, as they say, even a blind pig can find an acorn once in a while.
Oh, come on,
Ina. Ina had bets on this, and he's won a few meals.
Yeah, no, it's the other way around. I agreed to buy John.
It's on my part.
You notice I'm wearing black.
Yeah, I know.
It's because this is not a happy time.
I know. It's
I'm
sad.
happy to buy John a meal, but it's in misery, so we can drink a little wine and commiserate. The fact is, I've been in run races in the United States at the local, state level. I was involved in the national level ones. It always comes down to the economy. You've had 45 years of abuse of the middle class, where it's been shrinking from 61% to 50%. Yes, there's an increase in the upper middle class, but there's a larger increase in the poor. They don't trust anybody anymore. Every party says, I'm going to do something. And then you have this flim-flam man, Trump, come along and promise them things. And he has a very good gut in terms of what's important to people. He knew that the economy was going to be the issue. The issue about immigration, that was a counter to wokeism, which is really, you'll notice that there wasn't, a lot of woke talk or anything like that during this last 6 months of the election, because they had started polling it and realized people do not want their children exposed to this. They see that as going way, way too far. Right. So as a result, there was a reaction against that. It's, this kind of nativist thing where those people are wrong, despite the fact that we're a nation of immigrants. And to John's point about, all the Hispanics and African Americans, why did they vote for Trump? It's not that they like him. It's not that they like his racist jokes or the white power groups behind him, but they fear new immigrants at a time when it's very hard to get a good paying job. They fear new immigrants will take their job, that they'll be competitive factors. And so they say, I don't, all the rest of it, I don't care about, but I want to keep my job. As much as, it doesn't pay enough and I cannot meet all my bills. But imagine if there's 10 people who will do it for less than what I'm getting. So this has come down to, I don't think it's a generational swing or anything like that as far as John would go. I would just simply say that Americans are fed up. They're looking for easy answers, and they've gotten themselves a populist who will not deliver what he's promised.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. What happened to Jill Stein? Someone's just asked the question, what happened to Jill Stein today?
She's still alive. She's still alive.
Well, there was a story that she might be the most popular third-party candidate in history, and I haven't seen anything
Not
about
reflected
it.
in the votes.
It's not. Okay.
Look, sometimes the dynamics of an election polarizes, and at other times it creates space for third-party candidates to, shine a little bit. This election was an election that polarized, and no room for third-party candidates, and there she rode. Look, but there is actually a combination of the accumulated consequences of 40 years of economic structural change starting to play out politically now. And with that is also, I think, as John intimated, there is a, for want of a better term, a sort of a cultural, spiritual dimension to the politics of this current period of time where there is and it goes with the hollowing out of an economy, the purpose of a society, the woke stuff, undermining whatever sense of community, society, virtue, family, etc., etc. It is that's part of the mythology of American society and history, and there's a big hole in the middle of all of this. There's a hole in your hip pocket, and there's a hole in your heart, and that was perfectly ripe for a candidate who was able to really just mobilise and appeal to those sentiments. And look, I think it is there is a possibility that this is a demographic realignment. It's been when was the last big realignment? 100 years ago.
60s.
60s, and then before that, 20s, right?
FDR.
FDR,
Great Depression.
That was the flip.
And there was just as much tectonic shifting, as you call it, Warwick, going on at that time as well. And I have one last question, which I didn't put into the list that I sent you guys earlier on. So this is a question without notice, and maybe you just say I don't know anything about this, and that's okay. Project 25.
Oh gosh.
Well, Fernando and I were talking about this earlier on, and he asked me to ask you: is Project 25? Is it real? Is it going ahead? What's going to happen? John, first. Project 25. What do you need?
Well, I think this is something definitely under his blessing initially, but later on it's getting notorious. He wants to distance himself from it. I think the groundwork that's been done under Project 25 is going to crawl back into his administration. The people this project has vetted and some of the ideas and guidelines they have developed for various policy issues, they're going to come back. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a very conservative a think tank, and they're doing this thing for preparation for the new administration. So I think the outcome of this project is going to come back to him, and he's going to hire a lot of people that's being recommended in this project.
Warwick, you're agreeing. You're nodding in agreement.
Oh, look, absolutely. The fact that during the campaign it came under a little bit of scrutiny, which caused Trump in a very tactical kind of way to, pretend that he knew very little about it all, and brush it aside. But the reality is that this is there is a sense that what's happening is a movement, right, of a type, and a lot more intellectual effort has been put into to defining what this movement can actually accomplish this time around, as opposed to 8 years ago. And I have no doubt that many of the elements and many of the people involved are going to find air in this new administration. And the fact that the Republicans will now control the Senate will make it a hell of a lot easier for the appropriate kind of nominees to see their way through. So, this is in many regards a blueprint. Now, you don't have to put a capital B on it, and not all of it will be adopted, and some of it will be modified and whatever. But you can't tell me that this amount of work just somehow sits in isolation from the culture of the movement.
I know. What do you think? Is Project 25 going to be diluted and implemented over a long period of time, or is it something that we might see in January, February?
Okay, so Project 2025 was created by the Heritage Foundation, and it had a number of people who were associated very closely with Donald Trump. So the assumption is that this is some sort of ideology that is going to be blessed by Trump. But let me assure you, he hasn't read it. It's very long.
It's long. I've read it.
You've read it. Yeah. So have I. And my point is, it's ideological. The least ideological person in Washington is Donald Trump. He has absolutely no patience for that kind of stuff. He's focused on what he wants, deal making and the economic side of it, also keeping himself out of prison and things like this. But if these guys try to come to him like a bunch of holy monks, chanting in unison about the need for this, he will dismiss them. He's already been in this situation before. He brought on people who had different ideas than him. He doesn't want people with different ideas. He'll use them as long as they do what they're told. He doesn't care about them putting little bits of pieces in as long as it doesn't get in the way of his agenda. So I doubt that much of this will be done. Now, why did the Heritage Foundation do this? You have to remember that the Heritage Foundation and all these foundations came to power. There's a big 5 and there's a smaller 14 group of conservative think tanks and institutes, Hoover, etc. And they were created to make all these white papers. And they had tremendous success in one of their objectives, which was to control the Supreme Court. Right now, there are 5 Supreme Court justices who are members or so closely associated with the Federalist Society. And this was a brainchild of the Heritage Foundation. And they say, well, look, if it works this way, we can insert ideology into Donald Trump, except he's not like Bush Jr. He's not somebody where you put your hand in a certain place and wiggle your fingers and the lips move. Donald Trump is his own guy, and if he has any sense that somebody is trying to, push an agenda that isn't his, he will react very, very quickly. He'll get rid of them. I mean, that's clear from things. He's tired of these guys who have their own ideas and don't follow his. He had that the first time around, and he said, "I'm not going to stand for that anymore."
Yeah,
I have a question, gentlemen, very quickly. What about that lawsuit in New York State? Is the judge going to announce a sentence?
Yes, after the election. That's right.
Yeah.
So what is that?
John, right? I'm a lawyer. I was a criminal lawyer and a prosecutor. The judge can pronounce a sentence. All right. It would be unusual for him to push incarceration simply because this is a first-time offense, or there's a lot of offenses there. But even if he did, let's say he said, I'm going to give you 5 years, he would not impose a sentence now. What he would do is impose it upon the day you cease to become president. Then you will begin your 5-year term. There's no way that you can have a sitting president sitting in jail along with his routine of security guards and things like this. There would be real consequences. Remember, he's been elected with the majority vote of the American people. This will not go unnoticed by the judge if he cares about his life and his career.
Interesting. Okay, let's move to the big one. Somebody's put a comment up here. Could it be possible that people voted against the genocide and that's why Trump won and Kamala lost? Israel. Warwick?
Look, I did see, I think the short, most of the voting behaviour is driven by domestic considerations, but I did see some reports that Trump did very, very well in the districts in which there are a very large number of Muslims. I mean, I'm not reading anything into that other than an observation. But no, I think as we've discussed throughout, there's a very large proportion of Americans who feel that the system has let them down very, very badly. and their lives are actually not as good as they once were, certainly not as good as their parents, and the prospects for their children are even worse. And those things weigh heavily upon one's general attitudes towards incumbents, particularly incumbents who are telling you that you've never had it so good.
Interesting. So very much more about domestic rather than international, and particularly the genocide. I know. What do you think?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
They did polling. CNN did. They do extensive polling, post-polling, and international issues were only 5%. Obviously, there are groups like Muslim groups and things like this that are very much affected. They're going to regret their vote if they voted for Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has made it very clear to Netanyahu he doesn't care how much carnage goes on as long as it's over before he's sworn in. He wants to hang this on the Biden administration and, as you know, come in with a clean slate in his mind. So if Netanyahu has the existing bullets and bombs, you can be assured that the carnage is going to increase by tenfold over this next period.
I cannot fathom the Muslims voting for Donald Trump in a large scale. I guess the notion that they support Donald Trump probably is in more of the form of abstaining from voting at all. I can believe that. But even that's the case, I mean, they only represent a small population in a few states. I mean, mostly in Michigan. And even if they're able to change the result in Michigan, it's not going to make a change in the grand scheme of things. I mean, this is a red wave we're talking about. It's a massive, massive red wave across the 7 swing states. So I don't think that it's a major issue at all. It's just in the background, I guess.
Now, I'm inclined to agree that this was much more about domestics, but is Trump the lesser evil, and is that why he is going to be the next president of the United States? I know.
Well, Trump is pure evil. There's no question in my mind about that.
He's not the lesser evil, then.
No, there's no such thing as lesser. You see, this is the problem. We like to say the switch is on or off, and that we can make choices between them. As I've often said, in terms of China's attitude towards the election, it's 2 paths to the same cliff. It's just we're heading towards a catastrophe. Donald Trump has one path. If Kamala Harris would have had another path, but I'm saying they lead exactly the same place, and that's chaos, confusion, and a global situation where everybody's going to suffer.
There is no lesser evil then. As a lawyer, can you answer this question? Can Trump pardon himself?
No, this is state court stuff. He can only pardon himself for federal crimes.
But Jack Smith's case is gone, I guess, right? If he becomes president. Now he is the president.
Yes, he's said that he will appoint he will get rid of this prosecutor and put a new one in. The question is, can Jeff Smith get the thing started and finished before he's sworn in? I would say no. So yeah, it'll probably disappear.
No way.
So, Warwick, what do you think is going to happen with Israel? Is Israel going to move into Iran?
Well, look, I mean, it's been quite clear for the past 13 months that the Netanyahu administration are absolutely committed to this, what they would see as an apocalyptic war, and they are committed to rebuilding the temple and purging the region of everyone else, and the American state, bipartisan, overwhelmingly bipartisan, has backed it with a gusto. Who can forget the standing ovations? 50 odd standing ovations in a speech that would otherwise have lasted about 3 minutes, but talk about essentially saying this war, my war, is your war, and the Congress was up on its feet, cheering it on, and never has there been a more passionate and committed group of politicians in this world to the idea of genocide, certainly in the last 70 years, than the current American political elite. And I don't see any reason why that's going to change. Trump and his running mate have been committed to the Israeli cause as much as any other American politician has been. And what will unfold is going to be resolved on the ground. So the question for me isn't whether Israel is going to have a go. They're going to have a crack. The issue is whether or not Iran, firstly, is able to do something sometime soon that will send shockwaves and scare the living bejesus out of all of these crazy knuckleheads who want to have a war in the Middle East. Let's see what happens.
Let's see. All right. Before we wrap up, I have one last question, really, and you guys can contribute if you've got other questions, and maybe the one or two will come in through the audience as well. But I have one last question: are we optimistic or pessimistic about the future relationship with China? Because you guys are all China experts and American China experts at that. But are you optimistic or pessimistic, and why? How about John? You go first.
Well, I'm very pessimistic. I think it's going to cause a huge problem from China. I think the Chinese government is not going to stand by watching, maybe 2 million jobs gone and $400 billion just go down the toilet. They're going to do something. And initially, we're probably going to see a period of antagonism, maybe things will settle down after a while. But I think the Chinese government should be preparing for the stormy sea ahead. It's going to be very, very difficult, as I can imagine.
Aina?
The Chinese government has adopted strategic patience with the U.S. We tend to see everything very immediately, like this election, but the fact is, in 4 years, he'll be gone. And, he's going to make a mess of the American economy. There's an old saying, when a man is running towards the cliff, you don't need to push him over. I anticipate that Donald Trump will be the crisis that America needs in order to change its attitude towards the world and also its actions. And that's going to be after 4 years. Somebody will come up who says, look, this isn't working. We need to be part of the world, not a problem to the world.
I've actually said the same or very similar words. The United States is like an alcoholic that hasn't yet reached rock bottom. And
one more drink.
One more. When it reaches rock bottom, it'll need to change. Something needs to happen. And I think you've just kind of verbalized my thoughts on that. Warwick, what are your thoughts? Optimistic or pessimistic about the next 4 years, and why?
Well, again, I'm really prone to either optimism or pessimism. But I tend to have a slightly different take, I guess, than John. And John is pessimistic, and I can understand the argument, right, which is that China's going to lose a massive market, and that's going to reverberate through industries and employment. So I get that. I'd like to see whether or not America can disentangle fully $400 billion worth of trade inside 4 years without causing incredible self-harm to itself. So, as I said earlier in the piece, if America is committed to what is in effect a nostalgia-driven program of self-harm, which will have some collateral damage, on others, well, there's nothing you can do to stop them. Go right ahead. You want to double up? Go right ahead. Yes, there is going to be some collateral damage. There are other markets in the world. The American market is not the most important market in the world anymore, nor is the Europeans. They're not unimportant, but they're no longer the be-all and end-all. And if the world needs a shake-up, and America wants to cut itself off from markets and supply chains and try and figure out how it's going to do most of these things on its own, including, by the way, build the armaments that it keeps talking about without the inputs from 10,000 Chinese companies and the intermediate goods that China dominates globally. Well, go for your life. Go for your life. Because in 4 years' time, the working class, in whose name you're supposedly doing all of this stuff, will be even further immiserated. And they will be even more angry about the failure of the American system. right? But if this is what America thinks it needs to do, you can say to the person, don't do it. You're going to hurt yourself a lot. But, if you're going to do it, go for your life. The world will cope. Yes, there will be damage because disrupting systems always involves costs, but maybe in the end, this is exactly what the world needs, which is a good dose of recalibration so that the tectonic plates can continue grinding their way forward and move on, right? Move on. We talked about the G20, hopeless bunch, lost direction, no American leadership, it's gone. This enables and pushes forward with new institutions building. The IMF isn't going to come in and save anybody. Everyone knows this. Let's move on, right?
For a man who said you were not going to be pessimistic, Warwick, that's a pretty pessimistic take.
Well, I like to see optimism.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I could argue that is.
It will change. Yeah.
Finally, we're going to see the change that the world needs.
I think Warwick, you and Ina are both in agreement there with me as well about this alcoholic reaching rock bottom, or the when it gets to the point 4 years down the track, everybody says we cannot keep doing this. Then we can be optimistic about that. So we need to have this cleansing process.
Yeah, it's a Westphalian moment. The Catholics and Protestants had to kill each other until they ran out of energy and money, and then they say, "Okay, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. We'll just draw a line in the dirt, which is our borders." And this is what the world needs. The U.S. has to realize it's not a hegemon. It cannot maintain the kind of supremacy that it used to have because it just doesn't have the economic heft to do that. So change is coming. The question is it willing, or unfortunately, do we have a kinetic situation between major countries?
I think tonight has been entertaining, very, very enlightening as well. And it's great to I'm glad that we didn't all agree on everything because the last thing we wanted was an echo chamber running around in the studio here. But the fact is that we do all agree. I believe we all agree that that we're in for a very interesting time. And I think that's probably the best way to describe it. I'd like to give you each one final a moment to say a final word if you have anything that you'd like to add before we finish for the night, because I did want to finish before 90 minutes are up today, if that's possible. So John, would you like to go first? Some final thoughts?
Well, I think I have to do some soul searching. I have to really think about, how comes that Trump is able to have so much following. Somebody who is described as a fascist, someone has a criminal conviction, someone who has a trail of this very, very bad deeds, was still so much supported by a majority of Americans. Remember, he also won the popular vote. And I definitely misread that. There's an undercurrent currently going on in U.S. society that something is fundamentally changed. And I think the world needs to prepare for that. It's going to have a profound impact on the rest of the world, particularly China.
Wow, that's interesting. Warwick, final thoughts?
Well, America has clearly spoken. And it's spoken in the most definitive way one could imagine, given the way the system is set up, and has spoken in a way that says that the politics of traditional elites, in terms of the way that they frame the issues and try to badger people into voting in particular ways, has failed. Now, we're entering into a period of, certainly disruption. And more than likely, what mathematicians would describe as chaos. And out of that will come something else. And, and chaos is the interregnum. We are moving into a new world. Whether or not America joins the new world as a willing contributor with a refashioned sense of itself in the world as an equal, not first amongst equal, but as an equal, or whether it fights tooth and nail to hang on to its own diminished sense of, exceptionalism. Well, that's up to America in the end, because the rest of the world will move on. So whilst America is going to, circle the caravans, right? The rest of the caravan is going to move on.
And the dogs will still bark. I know some final words.
Well, I agree with Warwick. He says it so much better than I do. But I would add something, John, I don't think you're wrong. You were looking at the polls. The polls keep saying, pollsters kept saying that they had adjusted everything and that they had accounted for all of these unknowns. Well, that was a lot of nonsense. I know these pollsters. I've worked with them. I mean, they just fudge things. What they did basically is they made it plus or minus 6% in reality, as opposed to 3%, and then just said everything's really close. Therefore, how can we be wrong? They were embarrassed. They've done very, very well in the interim elections when they know the people who are most likely to vote, and they can predict what they're going to do. So, John, you shouldn't feel bad about listening to people who are supposed to know, especially, you look at 538 and the compilation on there. Look at it. Everything was in, like 1 or most 2%. Everything else was below 1%. And yet that's not what happened. And it's just because they were trying to save their own bacon because they had been embarrassed 2 times before. They're determined not to be this time. So disinformation sometimes comes not because somebody intends it, because somebody's trying to hide something. They're trying to, protect their image or whatever. And that's very apropos of America, which is American exceptionalism. What if one day we realize that American exceptionalism was just a fraudulent a piece of myth that we made up to justify all the bad stuff we did? Then we'd have to confront the fact that we had been at war for most of our times and we've killed lots and lots of people, and it was all for nothing. It was just for empire. It was not for God. It was not for good. It was not for a better world. It was simply to put money in our own pockets, just like we accused the Europeans in their colonialization. We just said it had financial colonialization as opposed to a physical one. So that's how I shall end.
And ending on a great note, we saved the best for last, I think.
It's a serious sermon, Anna.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And this is my first one back after a month off, and I'm very happy that it was such a good one. I'm glad to be back. I've got some of the same people from my former, a month ago, before I had my little incident and went away for a month. But some of the same audience are here, and I'm very happy to see them. We got well over 500 viewers tonight, consistently over 500. So that's been, for me, that's a very, very good show. And I'm really grateful for your guys' expertise. And John, you're in Russia at the moment. Thank you. I don't know what time it is over there, but thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. It's okay. It's 5 hours behind China. So it's
5 hours.
okay.
I can still see sunlight behind you in the glint in the curtains there.
Yes.
And Warwick,
John, just remember, you got a nice
you
big dinner and a bottle of wine waiting for you in Beijing.
No, it will be on me.
No, it's on me. We agreed.
I've been watching this little side bet going on, and it's interesting in the group that we're in. But thank you all very much, gentlemen. And once again, thank you to the audience for joining us and some of the questions and comments that come up. I've been reading them all and answering a couple of them, and some of them have given me some good ideas for future streams and maybe some future videos. So on that happy note, we'll end this evening and just say thank you to everybody